The Ven did not have a word for fear. This was not a boast. It was simply a fact of their biology, the same way they had no word for the color blue, because their 3 optical membranes process light in bands that human eyes would never resolve. Fear, as a neurochemical cascade, that particular flooding of threat signals that forces a creature to abandon reason in favor of raw survival, had never developed in the Ven nervous system. Their ancestors had not needed it. On the world they called Soreth, the predators had been slow, the atmosphere had been generous, and the Ven had risen to dominance not through panic and flight, but through a calm, methodical understanding of their environment. They cataloged, they mapped, they measured. By the time they reached space, they had been cataloging things for 11,000 years. They had files on every star within 400 light-years of Soreth. They had classified 212 sapient species, contacted 67 of them, and absorbed 19 into what they called the Accord. Not an empire, not a federation, but a shared archive. They compiled a library of civilizations, thoroughly studying, comprehending, and cataloging each one. The Ven were not cruel. They were not warriors. They were, at their philosophical core, the most sophisticated indexers a galaxy had ever produced, capable of cataloging and understanding vast amount of information in ways that no other species could match. Senior cartographer Evelus stood at the observation membrane of the survey vessel Pale. Evelus took note and observed a new system as it resolved itself through the ship's long-range collectors. 7 planets. 1 star, yellow and unremarkable, dominated the sky. 3rd planet from the star, atmospheric oxygen, liquid water, and electromagnetic noise pouring out of it like a wound. "They are loud," said her junior, a young Ven named Torath, his 4-fingered hands moving across the data surface with practiced ease. His skin, like all Ven skin, shifted in slow, unconscious patterns of pale gold and gray, the way their kind expressed ambient thought. He was currently cycling through pale amber, which meant he was curious. "They are loud," Evelus agreed. "Violet, designation Sol 3. Dominant species, bipedal bilateral symmetry, oxygen-dependent. Electromagnetic communication confirms technological development. The civilization of Class 4 may be on the verge of approaching Class 5. They haven't left their system yet," Torath noted. "No, but they're trying to." She watched the faint signatures of orbital stations, the chemical bloom of rockets, and the tight beam signals bouncing between moons. "Give them 60 years. Should we make contact?" Evelus considered. Contact protocols were precise. A Class 4 civilization, one that had achieved industrialization and early spaceflight, but had not yet established interstellar travel, was typically flagged for passive observation, meaning they are monitored without direct interference. You watched, you recorded, you waited until they came to you or until they crossed the threshold. Initiating contact too early could contaminate their developmental arc. "Passive observation," she said. "Deploy a listener array beyond heliopause. Let them talk. We'll learn their languages first." Torth's skin flickered briefly to a deeper amber. "How many languages do they have?" Evelus checked the preliminary scan. She read the number. She checked it again. 6,912, she said. Torath went completely still. His skin lost its color entirely, cycling to a flat, unreadable white, the Ven expression of something they did not yet have a category for. "For one species," he said. It was not a question. He just needed to say it aloud to make it real. "For one species," she confirmed. She filed it under anomalies. Cultural, a category for unusual or unexpected cultural phenomena, and told herself it was simply an intriguing data point. She would think about that decision later, in the years that followed, and wonder if she had already made her first mistake. The listener array absorbed 7 years of human broadcasting before the Accord's linguistics division declared a working fluency in 43 of the dominant languages. The listener array endured 7 years of news broadcasts, entertainment, religious sermons, military communications, stock market noise, children's cartoons, political speeches, love songs, and funeral rites. The first cultural summary was put together by a careful and old being Sul, who had spent 200 years studying the Drevithi, a type of plant-like being that uses chemical signals through their roots to share food and information about their surroundings. She had found the Drevati complex, but was ultimately incomprehensible. She found the humans baffling in a way that kept her awake during her sleep cycle, and the Ven did not typically experience sleeplessness, as their understanding of social interactions and emotional expressions was vastly different from that of humans. Her summary report, filed to senior cartographer Evelis, contained the following observations. The dominant species of Sol 3, self-designated humans, display an internal contradiction at every level of behavioral analysis. They produce art of extraordinary complexity, celebrating compassion, sacrifice, and communal love, and simultaneously maintain industrial systems of warfare that they have not ceased practicing for the entirety of their recorded history. They are aware of this contradiction. They discuss it constantly in philosophy, in religion, and in political discourse. They do not resolve it. They appear to find meaning in the tension itself. They grieve. This emotion requires elaboration. All species we have documented that experience loss display some form of recovery protocol, a neurological reset that allows the organism to return to a functional baseline. Human grief does not follow this pattern. They return to loss voluntarily. They build monuments to it. They write music designed to recreate the feeling of grief in individuals who did not experience the original loss, often using melancholic melodies and poignant lyrics that evoke deep emotional responses. They appear to consume grief as a form of nutrition for something we cannot yet identify, perhaps as a way to cope with their existential fears and to find meaning in the face of mortality. They are, by every metric, afraid of death. They have built more frameworks for conceptualizing and managing the fear of death than any species in the archive. Religious systems, philosophical schools, and entire artistic traditions whose sole function is to make death bearable. And yet they throw themselves toward it with regularity that defies the survival imperative, engaging in risky behaviors and pursuits that often lead to their demise, such as extreme sports, substance abuse, and self-destructive artistic practices. Not just soldiers. They are artists who sacrifice their health for their craft. For the benefit of their children, some parents give their lives. There are also instances where strangers sacrifice their lives for the sake of others. We do not have a category for this. Recommendation: elevate Sol 3 to special observation status. Do not initiate contact until further analysis is complete. Evelis read the report 3 times. She elevated the status. She extended the observation window. She did not tell her superiors how unsettled she felt, because the Ven lacked a word for that feeling. The humans found the listener array in 2091. It was a scout pilot named Raymond Okafor, 29 years old, running a solo mapping run beyond the heliopause as part of a deep space survey program. His ship was small, swift, and cheaply built, one of the new generation of vessels that humanity had been pushing further and further from home with a particular manic optimism that characterized their expansion phase. He almost flew past the array. Then his proximity alert pinged. Raymond Okafor spent 45 minutes examining the object, a cluster of crystalline filaments about the size of a city bus, emitting nothing, doing nothing, simply hanging in the dark and listening. And then he did something that Evelis, watching through secondary relay 6 light hours away, did not predict. He talked to it, not a formal transmission, not a diplomatic protocol. He just opened his comm channel and started talking, in a conversational, slightly nervous way that humans apparently talked when they were alone with something they didn't understand. "Okay," he said. "So, you're not one of ours. Too clean. Too." He made a sound she had learned to identify as a human expression of uncertain searching. Too intentional. This message was put here on purpose. This implies that someone intentionally placed it here. This implies that someone has been paying close attention. He paused. "Hi," he said. "I'm Ray. I'm from Earth. That's the 3rd planet, in case you've got us filed under a number. I'm guessing you've been out here a while. I'm guessing you know a lot about us." Another pause. "I hope you like the music. We got excellent music." Evelis sat very still in the monitoring chamber of the pale notation. Torath was watching her. His skin was cycling through colors she had never seen him display before. "Should we respond?" he asked. The protocol was clear. Passive observation. No contact initiation. The array had been discovered, which technically ended the passive phase, but the standard procedure was to retrieve the array, file the incident, and escalate to the contact division, who would then spend approximately 40 years preparing a formal first contact framework. Evelyn opened a channel. "Hello, Ray," she said in English, which she had been studying for 3 years. "We have excellent music, too. However, she speculated that your music might be more familiar." The silence on the other end lasted 11 seconds. She counted them. Then Raymond Okafor laughed, a sound she had heard thousands of times in broadcasts, but which felt entirely different when it was directed at her. It was not the polished laugh of an entertainer or the performative laugh of a politician. It was a sudden, helpless laugh of someone whose nervous system had just released an extraordinary amount of tension. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Wow. Okay." He laughed again. "You speak English." "I speak 43 of your languages," she said. "English is the one I find most fascinating. It steals from everyone." Another laugh, longer this time. "Yeah, that's fair. That's really fair." A pause. Are there a lot of you out there?" "Yes," she said. "There are a great many of us." "Are you close?" She considered the question. Close was a relative term. The pale notation was 6 light hours away. By Venn standards, that was practically adjacent. By human standards, given their current propulsion technology, it was approximately 8 months of travel. "Close enough," she said. "Right." He was quiet for a moment. She heard him breathing, that constant, rhythmic necessity of their oxygen-dependent biology, which she found oddly grounding. "I have to tell someone about this. I have to report this. There are going to be many people who want to talk to you." "I know," she said. "I have been watching your people for 14 years, Ray. I know very well how many of you there are and how much you like to talk." That's a little bit terrifying." She noted the word choice. "You use that word easily." "Terrifying. Well, yeah, I mean it's a big deal. Finding out you've been watched for 14 years. That's..." He trailed off. She waited. "That's terrifying and incredible. It's both terrifying and incredible at the same time. That's kind of how humans work. Actually, we're really good at holding two opposite feelings at once." She thought of Sewell's report. "We do not have a category for this." "Yes," she said quietly. "I have noticed." The formal contact process took 6 years. The 6-year period was marked by diplomatic negotiations, the fractious and magnificent chaos of governments and cultures trying to present a unified face to the cosmos, the careful, tested protocols of Venn contact division specialists, and the light-speed delays of translators, linguists, and xenobiologists who worked across the vast silence of space, making every conversation akin to letter writing. Evelyn was sidelined. She had violated protocol with her spontaneous response to Raymond Okafor, and while the violation had been productive, the early rapport she'd established had reportedly smoothed the initial diplomatic phases. The contact division did not reward improvisation. She was reassigned to analysis. She did not mind. Analysis was where she was most comfortable. She read everything. She read the human histories. All of them. Every civilization, from the clay tablets of their ancient river cultures to the hyperlinked archives of their 21st century. She read their wars. She read about a thing called the Holocaust and sat with the data for 6 days without filing anything, which was unprecedented for her. She read about a thing called the Apollo program. 12 humans who had walked on their moon, who had looked back at their small world from the lunar surface and described feeling, universally, something they call the overview effect, a sudden and overwhelming love for their own fragile home. She read their love stories. She read their philosophical arguments about the nature of consciousness. She read about a human who had spent 40 years working to end the political system of racial oppression through deliberate, strategic nonviolence, and who had said from prison that he found important to keep hope. She read that word, hope, and she ran it through the linguistic database. And the database gave her the technical definition, and the technical definition meant nothing. And she realized that she had been reading about hope for 6 years, and she still did not understand it as the humans understood it. Hope, as the Venn processed it, was simply probability assessment. You calculated the likelihood of a desired outcome. You planned accordingly. The emotional component was irrelevant to the calculation, but the human's hope was not tied to probability. That was the part she couldn't file correctly. They hoped that the probability would be near zero. They hoped, even when every rational metric indicated they should stop. They seemed to need hope in a way that preceded and superseded logic. A Venn engineer named Jervath, who had been assigned to the technical exchange program in the early contact years, sent her a note after his first 6 months on a human orbital station. They fixed a failing coolant coupling last week using a piece of flexible adhesive membrane and a 17-minute argument about the best angle of application. The coupling held. I ran the numbers afterward. It should not have held. I filed the results under insufficient data. But I think the real category is something we don't have. Evelyn wrote back, I think that is a category most things about them belong in. She was almost content in her analysis work. Then the incident at Vera Station happened, and everything changed. Vera Station was an Accord waypoint, a massive, centuries-old installation at the edge of the Korath Nebula, staffed by approximately 12,000 beings from 19 species. It was not a military installation. The Accord was not militarized because in 11,000 years of operation, it had never needed a military. This was not naivety. The Venn were careful, meticulous people. In 11,000 years, they had encountered aggression, territorial species, resource-competitive species, and species that struck first and asked questions never. They had developed responses, containment fields, non-lethal deterrence. Economic pressure backed the negotiation of boundaries. The concept of a dedicated force whose sole purpose was violence against other beings had simply never become necessary. The entity that arrived at Vera Station did not negotiate, indicating a potential escalation of conflict that could disrupt the fragile peace established by previous economic negotiations. Evelyn was 3 weeks into a new analysis project when the emergency signal arrived. She watched the footage 7 times before she fully processed what she was seeing. The entity, they had no name for it, no file, no precedent, was enormous. It did not travel in a ship so much as it was a ship, or perhaps the ship was simply an extrusion of something larger that existed mostly elsewhere. It communicated in a way that the station's language systems could not parse, not because it was sophisticated, but because it was not language at all. It was pressure. The pressure was pure, dense, and overwhelming, affecting every frequency simultaneously, as if the universe itself had formed an opinion, and was directly expressing it to the nervous system. 47 beings on Vera Station ceased to function when the signal hit. Not killed, the Accord's medical teams later described it as a kind of systemic collapse. Every regulatory system in the body shutting down simultaneously, like a library that had all its organizational principles deleted at once. The beings were alive. They simply could not organize themselves to continue, which resulted in their inability to perform essential functions necessary for survival. The entity began methodically dismantling the station's outer arrays. The Accord convened an emergency session. Every protocol was consulted. Every option was modeled. The unanimous conclusion: there was no containment framework, no deterrent, and no negotiation approach in the archive that applied to an entity that communicated through neurological collapse and dismantled structures for reasons that could not be determined. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Accord Senior Council used a phrase that existed in their language but had never been applied to their situation. We do not know what to do. It was Torath, now a senior analyst himself, gray at his skin's edges in the way of Venn aging, who made the suggestion. The humans, he said, they've been a full Accord member for 11 years. They are seated on the council. We should consult them. This is a crisis, said the council chair, an ancient cephalopod being named Ovrith, who communicated through chromatophore patterns that Evelyn had spent years learning to read. We need solutions, not consultation. The humans have a different archive, Torath said. They have been doing something we have never had to do for their entire history, which is... Torath's skin turned a deep, steady gold, filled with certainty. He said, they are surviving things they don't understand and can't predict, with no guarantee of outcome. The council was quiet for a moment. Bring them in, said Ovrith. The human delegation arrived at the emergency session via the new fold relay, one of the technologies exchanged during the contact years. 3 people, given her history with human cultural analysis, Evelyn had requested and received permission to attend as a liaison. She had studied human beings for 23 years. She was not prepared for them in person. The first was a woman named Dr. Amara Solis, 60 years old, a xenostrategist from the UN Accord Liaison Office. She wore her silver hair short and moved with the slightly deliberate quality of someone managing chronic pain. She had spent 30 years working on the theory of conflict resolution across cognitive difference, how beings with fundamentally different value systems found ways to not destroy each other. The second was a man named James Whitfield, 44, a theoretical physicist who had worked on the early studies of the listener arrays technology and had since become one of humanity's leading experts in non-standard physics, the kind of physics that dealt with things that didn't follow rules. The third was a young woman named Peta Havilah, 26, who was introduced as Whitfield's research assistant, but who, Evelyn noticed immediately, was the one who asked all the questions while Whitfield was still forming them. They watched the Veristation footage in silence. When it ended, Dr. Solis said, "Play it again." They watched it 3 more times. Then Peta Havilah said, "It's not dismantling the arrays. It's reading them." The council chamber was very quiet. Whitfield straightened. "Peta, look at the sequence." She pulled up the footage herself, advancing frame by frame with a confidence that Evelyn noted was characteristic. She often moved toward things she didn't understand rather than away. It's not random destruction. It's starting at the signal receivers and working inward. It's following the communication pathways. It's not attacking Veristation. "I'm trying to understand Veristation." Alvarez responded, "I'm trying to understand Veristation by dismantling it." "Yes," said Peta. She looked at the ancient cephalopod with eyes that held something Evelyn had cataloged in 1,000 human faces. The look of someone who found a terrible situation interesting, who found it interesting even while also being afraid. That's how it learns, maybe, by taking things apart. Like it changes everything it observes. Like for it, understanding and dismantling are the same action. Whitfield was already nodding. Radical empiricism operates on a structural level, meaning it focuses on the underlying framework that connects our experiences and knowledge. It can't separate the act of knowing from the act of... Dr. Solis spoke quietly. Silence. "If we're right," Whitfield said, "then it's not hostile. It's curious." "The 47 collapsed beings," said Alvarez, "were they also curious?" "I think," said Dr. Solis carefully, "that it doesn't know we feel pain, because it doesn't, perhaps, or it has no framework for the idea that being known, being analyzed, could hurt." She paused. "We have a very specific word for this, actually. We call it objectification. Treating something with interior experience as though it were simply an object to be examined." The council was now silent in a new way, a thoughtful silence. "We have done this," said Evelyn, before she could stop herself. Every head turned to her. She continued because she had started, and her mind would not let her stop. The Ven have been cataloging and indexing civilizations for 11,000 years. We observe, we record, we file. We have never asked a species how it felt to be studied. We certainly never asked the sole 3 humans in 14 years of observation. She paused. We call the entity's behavior incomprehensible, but I wonder if the humans would find it quite recognizable. Dr. Solis looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "Yes," she said, "we would." The plan was not a military one. The Accord had no military. The human representatives had not come with soldiers, but they had brought something that Evelyn was starting to realize was, in its own way, more dangerous and powerful than any weapon system. They had come with a theory. It took 6 days to develop. She had observed that the humans, who rarely slept under any circumstances, seemed to completely lose their need for sleep during the 6 days of uninterrupted, nearly sleepless work in a converted analysis chamber aboard the Accord command vessel. The core of the theory was Peta's, built on Whitfield's physics and Solis' strategic framework, and refined by 17 hours of argument with Evelyn and Torath and 3 other Accord scientists who had studied the entity's behavior patterns. The entity learned by consuming. It cannot be observed without dismantling. It communicated through an overwhelming neurological signal, not because it wanted to harm, but because it had never developed the concept of scale of calibration or the idea that a smaller being might need a smaller signal. It was, in some sense, a being of pure acquisition. Everything it encountered became part of it. It had never met something that did not become part of it. "We need to give it something it can't consume," Peter said at hour 40 of the planning session, sitting cross-legged on the floor with empty beverage containers around her because she had run out of table space. "Something that stays itself no matter what it does to it." "What is that?" said Torath. Peter looked up. She had the look of someone who had just arrived at a thought that frightened and excited her in equal measure. "A question," she said. "We give it a question it can't answer by itself, because you can only answer it by waiting. You can only answer it through time." Evelyn felt something move through her that she did not have a word for, something that the human nervous system was not supposed to generate, such as an overwhelming sense of empathy or a deep connection to others' emotions. She had been reading about this phenomenon in human literature for the past 23 years, but she never fully believed it could exist in a body like hers. Karo, she thought the word in the old Venroot language, the word that predated their civilization's catalog of themselves. The word was so old that it had lost its definition over the centuries, surviving only as a sound. She had always assumed it was simply an archaic sound with no modern referent. Standing in that room, watching a 26-year-old human sit on the floor and hold a question up like a light source, she thought, maybe Karo was always this. Maybe this is what they were trying to name. The question they chose was this: what do you become after you have consumed everything? This was not, because they already knew the answer. This question compelled the entity to pause, endure, and coexist with the unknown. The one question that could not be answered by dismantling the thing in front of you. It had to be delivered directly, physically, into the entity's field, which meant someone had to go to Vera Station and transmit it in a frequency the entity could receive without it collapsing into the high signal, overwhelming broadcast it defaulted to. This required calibrating the transmission to a level gentle enough to be perceived as communication rather than noise. This required someone to be present when the entity responded. "I'll go," said Peter. "Absolutely not," said Whitfield. "I'm the one who knows the calibration. I built the transmission model. You're 26. You're 44, and you're afraid of confined spaces, which is a significant problem for a shuttle insertion into an active entity field." She said it without cruelty, just with the flat efficiency of someone who had already done the risk assessment. "I'm not afraid of confined spaces. I'm not afraid of the entity." "You should be," said Whitfield. "I know," she said. "I am. Of SYMJHY. That's the part where I go anyway." Evelyn did not know the phrase. She looked at Dr. Solis, who smiled, a small, tired, profound smile. "It's a mix," Solis said. "English and something older. It means, roughly, now the burden is mine to carry. It means I'm done deciding whether to be afraid. The thing needs doing." Evelyn sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm coming with you." The shuttle they took was small enough to move without generating the large electromagnetic signature that seemed to trigger the entity's dismantling response. Peter flew it herself. Evelyn sat in the co-navigator's seat and watched the entity grow from a bright point to a presence that filled the entire forward view, and she noted, with a careful scientific detachment she had practiced for decades, that her hands were trembling. She had never had trembling hands before. She filed it. The entity was, there was no other word that worked, large in a way that wasn't entirely physical. As they moved into its field, Evelyn felt the edges of the overwhelming signal. Not painful, not yet, but present, like a very loud sound that registers only as pressure when you're still far enough away. Her sensory membranes kept wanting to close. Peter was flying with total, calm precision. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate, Evelyn could see it on the medical monitor, was elevated but controlled. "Are you genuinely unafraid right now?" "Evelyn," he asked. "I'm extremely afraid right now," Peter said, without looking away from the approach trajectory. "My hands are shaking on the inside. Does that make sense?" "No," Evelyn said. "But most things about your species confuse me, and I find my descriptions increasingly inadequate." Peter glanced at her then, a quick, sideways look with something in it that Evelyn could not catalog. "You've been studying us for 23 years, she said. "What's the thing you still don't understand?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The entity filled the view. The signal pressure was building. "Hope," she said. "I don't understand how you maintain it when the odds are against you. I don't understand the mechanism. I've read 10,000 years of your literature about it, and I still can't file it correctly. Peter was quiet for a moment, adjusting the approach vector. It's not about probability, she said finally. Hope is what you do when you decide the alternative, which is nothing, which is giving up, is worse than the discomfort of maybe being wrong. It's not a calculation. It's a choice. Every time. She paused. It's uncomfortable. It leaves you exposed. You can hope and still fail. You will fail sometimes. But the choosing itself does something. It changes how you move through the time you have. Evelyn thought about the Venn, their 11,000-year archive, their careful catalogs, their systematic and thorough mapping of everything they could observe, and the 47 beings on Vera Station who had collapsed because they encountered something outside the catalog. We never learned to hope, she said, because we always believed if we cataloged enough, we would be fine without it. We believed understanding was protection. Is it? No, she said. I don't think it is. The shuttle reached the insertion point. Peter began the transmission sequence. The question was transmitted in 7 simultaneous frequencies, calibrated to the entity's reception range, at a specific signal strength. Peter had spent 40 hours fine-tuning. Strong enough to register, gentle enough to not be interpreted as aggression or structural data. What do you become after you have consumed everything? The entity stopped. Not immediately. There was a long, terrible moment, perhaps 4 minutes, which felt to Evelyn like a geological epoch, during which nothing changed and the signal pressure continued building, and she had time to think very clearly about the distinct possibility that this had been a mistake and that the shuttle would shortly be incorporated into whatever the entity was. Then it stopped. The dismantling of Vera Station's outer arrays halted. The overwhelming signal dropped, not to silence, but to something lower, something that might almost be called frequency. A single, sustained note. It's listening, Peter said. Her voice was very quiet. It has never needed to listen before, Evelyn said. It has never encountered something it couldn't know or consume. It can't consume a question. You can't dismantle a question. You can only sit with it. The entity's signal shifted. It wasn't language, not even close, but it had a quality now that was different from the overwhelming broadcast that had collapsed 47 beings. It had, Evelyn realized, a quality of direction. It was pointed at them. It was, in whatever way was available to a being like this, paying attention. What do we do now? Evelyn asked. We wait, Peter said. We let it think. We don't rush it, and we don't run, and we don't do anything that looks like we're done talking. She exhaled slowly. This is the part humans are actually not very good at. Waiting. But we can do it when we have to. They waited 3 hours and 17 minutes. The entity's signal, during those 3 hours, underwent 17 distinct shifts in frequency and amplitude that Peter's recorder captured in full for later analysis. Later, Whitfield and a team of 12 scientists would spend 2 years analyzing those recordings and conclude that they represented something analogous to thought. Not human thought, not Venn thought, not any kind of thought previously cataloged, but a genuine processing of an idea that had not existed in the entity before it received the question. At hour 3, minute 17, the entity transmitted something. It was not language. It was a frequency pattern, complex, structured, and clearly intentional. When they brought it back, and the Accord's entire linguistics division worked on it for 4 months, the consensus interpretation was not a sentence or a concept, but something closer to a question returned, like a mirror. What are you that you ask? Not hostile, not aggressive, genuinely curious, in a way that could no longer cause harm, because the entity had, for perhaps the first time, paused before consuming, had recognized, however dimly, that the thing in front of it was not simply data. The war that wasn't a war ended in a question. The 47 collapsed beings on Vera Station began to recover slowly over following weeks as the entity withdrew to a distance, and the overwhelming signal faded. They all recovered fully. They would spend years trying to describe what it felt like. The sensation of having all your organizational systems simply switch off. And the closest any of them came was of an ecologist named Orith, who said it was like being studied by something so large it couldn't imagine you were also looking back. Evelyn retired from active fieldwork 2 years after the Vera Station incident. She did not retire from thinking. She spent her remaining years, and then lived long, patient lives, working on a project that had no precedent in the Accord's archive, a new category. It is a genuinely new conceptual framework for things that could not be filed, neither a new entry in an existing file nor a reclassification of known data. She called it the Caro Index. The Caro Index is not a list of species, technologies, or phenomena, but rather a catalog of genuine questions, devoid of answers, that define the limits of what the human mind can comprehend through its own processes. The questions could only be held. That changed the asker more than it illuminated the subject. She invited humans to contribute to it. They contributed 3,000 entries in the first year, which did not surprise her. Raymond Okafor, retired now, gray-haired, with grandchildren, he showed her in photographs during their occasional correspondence, sent her a note when he heard about the project. He was 62. He had spent his post-contact years as a speaker and educator, taking school children to the history of first contact, explaining to young humans what it meant to be part of a universe that was far larger and stranger than they had imagined. "I think what you're doing," he wrote, "is what we've always been trying to do. We are striving to create a space that accommodates the real but unfitting aspects of the system. We've had religions and arts and philosophies for 10,000 years that were basically attempts at the same thing, a place to put the things that matter but can't be measured, such as emotions, beliefs, and personal experiences that shape our understanding of the world." "Caro," he wrote, "I like that word. Can I use it?" She wrote back, "I think it was always yours." Peter Havilah presented the full analysis of the entity interaction at the Accord's Grand Assembly 3 years after Veristation. She was 29 years old. She stood in the center of the enormous chamber, 12,000 beings attending in person, millions more through relay, and she delivered a speech that was, by any measure, a masterwork of interspecies communication. But the part that Evelys remembered, the part that she returned to in the quiet of her long evenings, was not the formal analysis. It was what Peter said at the end. "We came into this situation," she said, "with a fundamental disagreement about what knowledge is. The Accord believes, it has believed for 11,000 years, that knowledge is what protects you. If you map, catalog, and understand enough, you will be safe. The entity believed that knowledge is what you become when you consume what's around you. We came in with a third option." She paused. "We believe that knowledge is what changes you. You don't catalog the universe to shield yourself from it. You go out into it, and it makes you different, and the difference is the point." She looked around the chamber. "We are brave despite feeling fear. We feel fear constantly. We fear death, loss, the dark, each other, and things we cannot name. We have always been afraid. We go anyway, because—" She stopped, gathered herself. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet enough that the chamber had to strain to hear her. "The alternative is to cease. And we have never, in all our history, been able to stop. Not for long. Not completely. Something in us keeps moving toward the next thing, the unknown thing, the thing that might be wonderful or terrible or both." She spread her hands. "We don't know why. We have argued about it for 10,000 years. We still don't know. But we are here, and we are still asking, and I hope that is enough." The chamber was silent. Then Ovrith, ancient, vast, cephalopod chromatophores, cycling in patterns that Evelys had spent years learning and that she now read without effort, displayed a pattern that had no precedent in the diplomatic record. The closest translation in any of the 67 languages of the Accord was, "We did not know we were missing something until you showed us the shape of the absence." Evelys lived for another 112 years. She watched humanity grow into the Accord the way she had watched many species grow, with the careful, affectionate attention of someone who had learned, late in life, that observation is not a neutral act. Observing something inherently transforms one. In some sense, both the observer and the observed are always engaged in a conversation. She watched humans fight, forgive, grieve, rebuild, fail spectacularly, and try again with enthusiasm for trying that she would never fully understand and would never stop finding extraordinary. She finished the Caro Index at the age of 407. It had, at that point, 1,200,000 entries. The first entry The one she had written on the night after the Verastation crisis, alone in her analysis chamber with trembling hands, read, "What is the word for feeling of encountering something that your entire understanding cannot accommodate, yet you choose to keep looking?" She had left the answer space blank. After 112 years, she wrote in it, "Kero, the word is Kero. We did not lose its meaning. We had simply not yet earned it." And